Louisiana in October is enchanting. The air is filled with the scent of magnolias, and the sun, breaking through the thick leaves of oak trees covered with Spanish moss, creates a whimsical mosaic of shadows. 60 years ago, I fell in love with New Orleans at first sight. Today, at 74, this city remains the only one that has not broken my heart. Mom, you left your pills in the bathroom again. Mirabelle's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. How many times do I have to tell you to keep them in your room? I hurriedly closed the photo album and got up from the chair. My knees betrayed me with a twinge of pain. I'm sorry, dear. I completely forgot, I muttered, carefully putting the album back on the shelf. That's right, I forgot. Just like yesterday and the day before, Mirabelle placed the glass with my pills on the table with such force that water splashed onto the surface. Wipe it up. I obediently took a napkin and dried up the puddle. Mirabelle continued to stand over me, her arms crossed over her chest. Her perfectly manicured nails were painted scarlet, reminiscent of drops of blood. Today she was wearing her favorite sand-colored pantsuit, which she claimed hid the extra pounds on her hips, although it was unlikely that the slender Mirabelle had any extra pounds. Evan has already asked 3 times if breakfast is ready. She glanced at her watch. He has an important meeting at 10. I just put the coffee on and now I'm going to make him his favorite eggs and bacon. I hurried to the kitchen, trying not to show how much my back hurt. The kitchen in Evan's house was spacious, with trendy granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. I used to enjoy cooking here, feeling like part of the family. Now I felt like an uninvited guest, awkwardly bumping into the real owners in the hallways. I took out a frying pan, trying not to make any noise. Mirabelle couldn't stand unnecessary noise in the morning, claiming it made her migraines worse. While I was making breakfast, I remembered how different things had been just 3 years ago. After Percy died, I lived in our old house on Esplanade Street for almost 5 years. The house was quite small: a living room, a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a tiny patio where I grew roses and jasmine. The walls were thin and the floors creaked, but it was our home, full of memories and love. Evan grew up there. Eloise was born there, and 48 years of my marriage to Percy took place there. Hurricane Delia swept through New Orleans like a raging fury. It tore off part of the roof, knocked out windows, and flooded the second floor. I spent the night in my neighbor Ruth's basement, trembling with fear and praying that my little house would hold up. Mom, you can't stay in this wreck, Evan said, surveying the damage 2 days after the hurricane. It's not safe here. The ceiling could collapse at any moment. I'll call the repairman, I replied, wiping away my tears. The insurance should cover part of the cost. Evan then sat down next to me on the sofa and took my hands in his, which were so similar to his father's, with long fingers and neat nails. Listen. His voice became soft, just like it was when he was a child and asked for permission not to go to bed. The repairs will cost tens of thousands. You'll spend all your savings and still not be able to completely restore the house. What if there's another hurricane? You know the statistics. They're happening more and more often. I looked at the photo of Percy on the mantelpiece. The glass was cracked, but his smile remained as warm as ever. This house is all I have left of your father, I whispered. Every corner here holds his memory. The memory of Dad lives in us, not in these walls. Evan squeezed my hands tighter. Mom, move in with us. We have a big house. You'll be comfortable. Mirabelle will be delighted. She's been saying for a long time that it's dangerous for you to live alone. I had my doubts. Mirabelle had always been polite but cold. She never called me Mom, preferring the formal Mrs. Holdsworth. Our conversations rarely went beyond discussing the weather and new recipes. What about the house? I asked. We'll sell it, Evan replied confidently. Land in this area is worth a lot of money, even with a damaged house. We'll invest the proceeds in my business, which is currently expanding. In a couple of years, you'll get double the return. So I ended up in a spacious 2-story house in the Garden District, where Evan and Mirabelle had lived for the past 10 years. My bedroom was the former guest room on the first floor, next to the laundry room. Evan explained that it was out of concern for me. I wouldn't have to climb the stairs. The eggs are ready, I shouted as I put the food on a plate. Please don't shout, Evan said as he entered the kitchen, adjusting his tie as he walked. Mirabelle just took her headache medicine. I'm sorry, I said, setting the plate in front of him. Fresh coffee? Thanks, he said, sitting down at the table without looking at me. I'll need some clean shirts for tonight. We have a business dinner with our partners from Dallas. Of course, dear. I watched him eat. Every year, Evan looked more and more like his father. The same dark brown eyes, the same jawline. But he had inherited my father's personality, secretive, calculating. Percy was different, open and generous. What's this? Evan pushed his plate away and grimaced. Is something wrong? I leaned over his plate, trying to see what the problem was. This bacon, it's undercooked. I looked at the bacon. It was crispy, just the way Evan usually liked it. But I cooked it the same way I always do. I asked you to cook it crispy, Evan interrupted. Lately, you haven't been listening to what people are saying. It's crispy, I said, touching a strip of bacon cautiously. See? Evan sighed with that particular look of exhaustion that had appeared on his face in recent months when talking to me. Okay, never mind. Just try to be more careful next time, he said, glancing at his watch. I have to go. Don't wait up for me tonight. I'll be back late. He got up from the table, leaving his eggs almost untouched, and headed for the door. I wanted to tell him I loved him, but the words stuck in my throat. We used to be close. When Evan was 7, he came down with pneumonia, and I didn't leave his bedside for 3 days, changing compresses and reading Treasure Island aloud. When he was 16, he wrecked his father's car, and I defended him when Percy wanted to take away his allowance for a whole year. At 22, when his first girlfriend dumped him, he came home in the middle of the night, and we sat on the porch until dawn talking about love and loss. What had changed? When did my little boy turn into a cold stranger? After Evan left, the house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. I cleared the table, washed the dishes, and started on the shirts. Ironing clothes was one of the few tasks Mirabelle trusted me completely with. You have a special talent, she would say with a forced smile. No one irons Evan's shirts like you do. The house was quiet, too quiet. Mirabelle had gone out on business. She organized social events for the city's elite. It's not work, it's a hobby, she explained to her friends. Just a way to maintain the right connections. They didn't have children. Mirabelle believed that children would interfere with her career and ruin her figure. I finished with the shirts and decided to bake an apple pie. Evan had loved it since childhood. Maybe it would cheer him up. As I prepared the dough, I remembered how I had sold the house. The buyer was a young real estate agent who planned to tear down the old building and build a modern cottage. I received a check for $120,000, less than the land was worth, but more than I expected for a damaged house. Evan suggested investing the money in his business manufacturing specialized furniture for restaurants and hotels. Now is the perfect time, Mom, he persuaded me. After the pandemic, all establishments are renovating their interiors. I just got a contract with a hotel chain on the West Coast. In 2 or 3 years, you'll get twice as much. I agreed, although deep down I felt uncertain. Percy always said, never put all your money into one thing, Ollie. But I trusted Evan. He seemed so confident, so successful. As I signed the documents in Evan's office, I asked, maybe we should leave at least part of it in a deposit account, just in case. In case of what? Evan looked offended. Don't you trust me? Of course I trust you. It's just nothing. You have a house, food, everything you need. Why do you need extra money? You'll just worry about how to save it. His words made sense, and I gave in. After all, I had a small pension, which was enough for medicine and small expenses. And my savings could indeed be put to good use working in my son's business. The smell of apples and cinnamon filled the kitchen. I wiped my hands on my apron and looked out the window. Chrysanthemums were blooming in Mirabelle's garden, bright orange and burgundy balls like little suns against the backdrop of a well-kept lawn. I had once offered to help with the garden. In my youth, I had been interested in landscape design. Mirabelle politely but firmly declined. We have a gardener, Mrs. Holdsworth. He knows what he's doing. Mirabelle returned home as I was taking the pie out of the oven. Baking again? She said, tossing her purse on the counter. Evan said he's trying to lose weight. Apple pie is his favorite, I replied. And I use less sugar. Carbs are carbs, Mirabelle snapped. Anyway, do what you want. Just don't complain later that he doesn't appreciate your efforts. She opened the refrigerator and took out a bottle of green smoothie. We're having dinner with the Collingwoods tonight, she announced, taking a sip from the bottle. Can you manage on your own? Of course, dear, I'll heat up some soup. Great. Mirabelle headed for the kitchen door but stopped in the doorway. By the way, I found your hair clips in our bathroom. Please keep your things in your own room. My room was small but cozy. Evan allowed me to take a few things from the old house. The rocking chair Percy gave me for my 40th birthday, a few paintings of New Orleans, and bookshelves filled with my favorite novels and photo albums. I settled into the chair with a cup of tea and opened the album I had been looking at that morning. Here was Evan at 5 years old, with a fishing rod bigger than himself, proudly showing off his first catch. Here was Eloise, serious beyond her years, in her prom dress, with her honor roll medal around her neck. And here were Percy and I on our 40th anniversary, dancing in a small restaurant in the French Quarter. His hair was already gray, and my figure had long since lost its slenderness, but our eyes still looked at each other with tenderness, as if we were 20 again. Eloise called before bed, as she did every week, no matter where she was. Unlike her brother, she had chosen a career in international law, which required constant travel. How are you, Mom? Her voice sounded tired but warm. I'm fine, sweetie. How's Tokyo? It's stuffy and crowded. The negotiations are dragging on. I'm afraid I'll be here for another couple of weeks. We talked for about half an hour. I didn't mention the tense atmosphere at home, Evan's coldness, or Mirabelle's sharp remarks. Why bother my daughter, who already has enough on her plate? Say hi to Evan and Mirabelle, Eloise said before saying goodbye. And don't forget to take your blood pressure medication. Of course, dear. Take care of yourself. I hung up the phone and felt the familiar loneliness that always came after talking to my daughter. Eloise was like her father, straightforward, honest, with a strong sense of justice. We had always been close, despite her busy schedule. Unlike Evan, she called regularly, sent postcards from different countries, and always found time to visit me when she was in town. I closed the album and walked over to the window. New Orleans glowed with thousands of lights at night. Somewhere out there, a few miles away, stood my old house, or rather, what was left of it. I wondered if the new owner had already demolished it. Had he built his modern cottage with panoramic windows and minimalist design? That night, I lay awake for a long time, thinking about how my life had changed over the past 3 years. Evan, who had once been a loving and caring son, now barely acknowledged my presence. Mirabelle, who had never hidden her irritation, was becoming increasingly hostile. I often wondered what had caused this change. Maybe problems in business, or in their relationship? Or maybe I really had become a burden, as Mirabelle had once said, thinking I couldn't hear her. Before going to bed, I took my blood pressure pill and prayed, as I did every night, asking for strength and patience for the next day. Deep down, I hoped that everything would work out, that Evan would be his old self again, and that Mirabelle would soften. But with each passing day, that hope faded like the morning fog over the Mississippi. Autumn in New Orleans was rainy. Heavy leaden clouds covered the sky, and it seemed as if the whole world had lost its color. I looked out the window at the gray garden, where Mirabelle's wilted chrysanthemums fought unsuccessfully against the weather. The rain drummed on the porch roof, creating a monotonous, lulling rhythm. Over the past few weeks, my health had begun to decline. My joints ached more than usual. My blood pressure fluctuated despite medication. And in the mornings, I had trouble getting out of bed because of lower back pain. But I tried not to show it, continuing to do my household chores. Indian summer is over, I muttered, rubbing my wrists. They ached, warning of an approaching low-pressure front. In my youth, I laughed at old women who predicted the weather based on their aches and pains. Now I was one of them. The house was empty. Evan had gone to the factory, and Mirabelle had gone to some charity breakfast. In moments of loneliness like these, I felt like a ghost, an insubstantial shadow gliding through unfamiliar rooms. I had to remind myself that I lived here, that this was now my home. Although, to be honest, this house never became mine. I decided to do some cleaning. Mirabelle had a housekeeper who came twice a week, but between her visits I tried to keep things tidy. It made me feel useful and helped combat the nagging feeling that I was out of place. The floor in the hallway was wet from rain and footprints. I picked up a mop and began to thoroughly wipe the marble slabs. The doorbell rang unexpectedly, making me jump. A delivery man was standing at the door with a huge box. "Delivery for Mirabelle Holdsworth." The young man smiled, holding out a tablet for me to sign. "I'm her mother-in-law. I can accept it," I signed with a trembling hand. My handwriting had become completely illegible, unlike before, when I taught elementary school and was proud of my calligraphic penmanship. The box was unexpectedly heavy. I struggled to drag it into the house and set it down in the living room. Probably another decorative element for the never-ending renovation Mirabelle had started. She was constantly remodeling the house, changing the furniture, rehanging the pictures, as if trying to erase all traces of the past and create a perfect, sterile space. Returning to cleaning, I slipped on the wet floor. My attempt to grab the stair railing didn't help. I fell, awkwardly twisting my arm. Pain shot through my wrist and I cried out, more from surprise than from pain. My first thought was, just don't wake Mirabelle with your scream. But then I remembered that she wasn't home. I tried to get up, leaning on my good arm. My left wrist was swelling up before my eyes, taking on a frightening bluish tint. The pain pulsed from my fingertips to my elbow. I limped to the kitchen and took a bag of frozen peas out of the freezer. Pressing it against my wrist, I sat down on a chair, trying to decide what to do next. Call an ambulance? But what if it was just a bruise? Mirabelle would be furious if I wasted money on an unnecessary call. Call Evan? But he was in an important meeting. I couldn't distract him. The decision came naturally. I would just wait for someone to come home and ask them to take me to the emergency room. By evening, the pain had become unbearable. My wrist was so swollen that the skin was stretched tight and shiny. I could barely move my fingers. When the key turned in the lock, I almost cried with relief. "Mirabelle, thank God," I began, but stopped when I saw her face. "What happened?" She looked at my hand pressed against my chest. "I fell while washing the floor," I explained. "I think I broke my wrist." Mirabelle put her bags on the floor and came closer. Her perfume, tart and expensive, momentarily overpowered the smell of the ointment I had rubbed on my hand. "Let me see," she said, gently taking my hand. "Yes, it looks like a fracture. We need to go to the hospital. Give me 5 minutes, I'll just get changed." I felt a rush of gratitude. Mirabelle could be cold and demanding, but in a critical situation, she didn't abandon me. The emergency room at Oakser Hospital was crowded. We waited almost 3 hours before I was called in for an X-ray. All this time, Mirabelle sat next to me, buried in her phone, responding to messages from time to time. She called Evan and briefly explained the situation, but he couldn't come. He was having dinner with clients. "A broken radius," the young doctor said, looking at the X-ray. "Judging by the age and nature of the fracture, you'll need a cast for 6 to 8 weeks." "6 weeks?" Mirabelle asked, and I noticed her lips tighten. "At best," the doctor nodded. "Bones heal more slowly in older people, and then you'll need physical therapy." We got home after midnight. My arm, encased in a heavy cast, hung from a sling. The painkillers were wearing off and my wrist was starting to ache again. "Thanks for driving me," I said to Mirabelle as we entered the house. "You're welcome," she rubbed her eyes wearily. "Do you need anything? Tea, medicine?" "No, thanks, I'll be fine." Mirabelle nodded and headed for the stairs. "By the way," she stopped halfway up, "I'll be at a conference all day tomorrow, and Evan is flying to Chicago until Wednesday. I think you should call Eloise and ask if she can come over to help." "Eloise is in Tokyo, you know that," I objected, "and she has important negotiations. I can manage on my own." "As you wish." Mirabelle shrugged and disappeared upstairs. The next few days turned into a living hell. I couldn't do basic things like button my clothes, cut bread, or open a can of food. Taking a shower became a challenge. I was afraid of slipping and breaking my other arm. Cooking was almost impossible, so I survived on yogurt and fruit, which I could eat with one hand. Evan returned from Chicago gloomier than a cloud. He answered my questions with monosyllables, and I stopped asking. In the evening, I heard him arguing with Mirabelle in their bedroom. "6 months without profit," his muffled voice carried. "If this continues, we'll have to sell the equipment." "I told you we needed to diversify the business," Mirabelle replied. But as always, you didn't listen to me. For God's sake, don't start that again. What else can I do? We've been barely making ends meet for 3 months, and now your mother is interfering. I moved away from the door, feeling my face flush. So Evan's business was going badly. And it seemed that my presence was only making the situation worse. In the morning, I tried to talk to Evan about the money from the sale of the house. He was having breakfast in the kitchen, reading the news on his tablet. Mirabelle had gone to her massage therapist. Evan, dear, I sat down carefully opposite him. I wanted to ask you about the money from the sale of the house. He looked up from his tablet and looked at me with irritation. What about it? You said you invested it in a business, and in a couple of years I'd get twice as much. It's been 3 years now. So what? He put down his tablet. Are you saying I have to report to you? No, of course not, I instinctively cringed. It's just that if you're having financial difficulties, maybe I should withdraw some of the money. I could rent an apartment and not be a burden to you and Mirabelle. A burden? Evan smirked. What makes you think you're a burden? I overheard your conversation yesterday, I admitted. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop. But you did. His voice turned cold. Mirabelle sometimes says too much. We're having some temporary difficulties. Nothing serious. Anyway, if I could help. Mom, Evan stood up abruptly. You have nothing to worry about. I have everything under control. As for the money from home, he hesitated. It's a long-term investment. I can't withdraw it at any time. It's business, you understand? I understand, I nodded, although I didn't really understand. Percy had always been transparent about financial matters, never hiding from me how much was invested and where. Good, Evan said, picking up his tablet. I have to go. By the way, a caregiver is coming today to help you with household matters. A caregiver? I asked in surprise. But that's an extra expense. It's a necessary expense, Evan cut me off. Mirabelle can't take care of you. She has her own things to do. And hiring a full-time housekeeper is even more expensive. He left, leaving me with a heavy feeling in my chest. For the first time, I wondered if there had been no investments at all. What if Evan had simply spent my money? On something for his business or for the house, it didn't matter. The fact was, the money was probably gone. The nurse, Mrs. Pruitt, turned out to be a large black woman with a loud voice and businesslike manner. She helped me shower, get dressed, and prepare simple meals. She also cleaned and did the laundry. You're too thin, Mrs. Holdsworth, she said on the second day. You need to work up an appetite. Let's take a walk to the park. I hadn't been for a walk in several weeks since I broke my arm. Going outside was delightful. Fresh air, birds singing, leaves rustling underfoot. On the way back, Mrs. Pruitt took me to a small restaurant where we ate roast beef sandwiches. Don't tell Mrs. Mirabelle, she winked at me. She told us to stick strictly to the budget. Mirabelle really did become even more frugal. She checked every bill, turned off the lights in empty rooms, and constantly reminded us to save water. One day I noticed her transferring groceries from branded bags to plain containers. Why are you doing that? I asked. So Evan doesn't see that I'm buying expensive groceries, she replied without a hint of embarrassment. He thinks we're on the verge of bankruptcy, and I'm not going to eat cheap canned food. That evening, I overheard Evan and Mirabelle talking again. I was coming back from the bathroom when I heard my name. Mom is becoming a problem, Evan said. This caregiver costs a fortune. You insisted that she live with us, Mirabelle retorted. I suggested looking for a good nursing home. Do you think I haven't looked? Evan's voice sounded desperate. The decent ones cost $5,000 a month. We just don't have that kind of money. What about her pension and Social Security? It's barely enough for medicine and a caregiver. Damn, if only we could get some of that money back. What money? Mirabelle's voice became suspicious. Pause. From selling her house? Evan replied reluctantly. You said it all went into that failed project in Nashville. Not all of it, Evan said so quietly that I could barely make out his words. I managed to get some out before it all collapsed, about $30,000. And where is it? Mirabelle's voice was steely. It went toward the down payment on the new machine. I plan to pay it back from the profits, but there are no profits, Mirabelle finished for him. Fantastic, just fantastic, Evan. What do you want me to do? His voice was tinged with irritation. I'm trying to save the business, our life, our home. Maybe the problem is that you're a lousy businessman? Mirabelle blurted out. Maybe you should have listened to me and sold everything a year ago while you still had the chance? I'm not going to discuss that, Evan snapped. The question is what to do about Mom. She can't stay here forever. Why not? If you're up to your ears in debt and can't afford a nursing home, what else is there? I don't know, Evan sighed. Maybe Eloise could help? She probably makes more than the two of us combined. Ha! Mirabelle snorted. Eloise, who visits her mother once every 6 months? She'll rush to help, sure. I stepped away from the door, feeling nauseous. My suspicions were confirmed. Evan had lost my money, or worse, he had spent it on his own needs, with no intention of paying me back. And now he and Mirabelle were discussing how to get rid of me. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I lay in the dark, listening to the rain drumming on the roof, thinking about how I was all alone. My husband was dead, my son had betrayed me, my daughter was far away. I no longer had a home, nor did I have any savings. All I had was a broken arm and a broken heart. In the morning, I tried to talk to Evan again. He was eating breakfast in the kitchen, buried in his tablet as usual. Mirabelle had gone to a friend's house for the weekend. Evan, I sat down across from him. We need to have a serious talk. He looked up, and I noticed the dark circles under his eyes. Evan had lost weight over the past few weeks, and his face had taken on an unhealthy grayish hue. About what? About the money from the sale of the house, I decided to be direct. I know that most of it is gone, and I know about the $30,000 you spent on the machine. Evan turned pale. You were eavesdropping? It doesn't matter. I shook my head. What matters is that you deceived me. You promised to save and grow my money, but you spent it. I didn't. He trailed off. It was an investment in the business. It was supposed to pay off. But they didn't. I looked him straight in the eye. And now you and Mirabelle are thinking about how to get rid of me. I heard your conversation about the nursing home. Mom, you've got it all wrong. Evan rubbed his face with his hands. Yes, we're having financial difficulties. Yes, I lost some of your money in an unsuccessful project. But we don't want to get rid of you. We're just looking for the best way out of this situation. The best way out for whom? For me or for you? Evan sighed. For everyone. You need care, especially now, with your arm. Mirabelle and I both work. We can't provide that kind of care. In a good nursing home, you would get everything you need: medical care, socialization, entertainment. And you would be rid of the burden, I said calmly, without reproach. You're not a burden, Mom. Evan looked genuinely upset. It's just a difficult situation. The business is on the verge of bankruptcy. We could lose the house. I'm trying to keep afloat. With the money from selling my house. I'll pay you back, I swear. He reached across the table and touched my good wrist. As soon as things settle down, I'm working on a new contract that could change everything. I looked at my son and saw a frightened boy who had broken my favorite vase and was trying to justify himself. When Evan was 10, he played ball in the house, even though I had forbidden it many times. The ball hit a Chinese vase that Percy had brought me from a business trip to Hong Kong. Evan cried and swore that he would buy me a new one, even better when he grew up. I forgave him then, as I always did. I believe you, I lied. But I need to know exactly how much of my money is left and where it is now. I'll prepare a report for you. Evan quickly agreed. I'll show you all the documents, bank statements. Just give me some time, there's so much going on right now. Of course, dear, I smiled my most motherly smile. I'm in no hurry. Evan clearly relaxed, believing that the conversation was over and the danger had passed. But inside me, something broke completely. I no longer trusted my son, and for the first time in many years, I realized that I couldn't stay in this house, surrounded by people who saw me as nothing but a burden. In the evening, I called Eloise. Despite the time difference, she answered right away. Mom, what's wrong? You sound strange. Everything's fine, dear. I tried to speak calmly. I just wanted to know when you're coming back from Tokyo. In a week, if everything goes according to plan, she replied. Long negotiations, you know how it is. Why? I wanted to tell her everything, About my broken arm, about the conversation I overheard, about the money I wasted. But something stopped me. Maybe the last remnants of my pride. Nothing special. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I just missed you. Evan and Mirabelle are so busy that I hardly see them. Are they all right? There was a note of concern in Eloise's voice. Yes, of course. I forced myself to laugh. Just the usual work routine. How are you? We talked a little more about her job, about Tokyo, about the new contract she was hoping to sign. Eloise had always been ambitious and determined. She took after me in that respect, although she would never admit it. I love you, Mom, she said before hanging up. Take care of yourself. I'll call you next week. I love you too, I replied, feeling a tear roll down my cheek. I decided not to bother my daughter with my problems, at least not over the phone. When she came back, I would tell her everything. In the meantime, I had to endure another week in a house that had never felt like home, with people who saw me as nothing more than a burden, and with the bitter realization that my own son had lied and deceived me. The days dragged on agonizingly slowly. My arm in the cast itched and ached, especially at night. Mrs. Pruitt came 3 times a week to help with the essentials, but the rest of the time, I was on my own. Evan was hardly ever home. He left early in the morning and returned well after midnight. Mirabelle was busy with her own affairs, which apparently included long lunches with her friends and shopping in expensive boutiques. On Wednesday morning, as I was having breakfast in the kitchen, Mirabelle unexpectedly joined me. She was wearing a designer tracksuit and looked excited. Alvin, she called me by name, which was extremely rare. We need to talk. I put down my spoon and looked at my sister-in-law with concern. Is something wrong? Is Evan okay? Evan? She laughed nervously. Oh yes, he's just fine. If you consider it normal that he's on the verge of a nervous breakdown because of his debts. I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. Could you lend us some money? Mirabelle blurted out. Just a little, 10,000. It's temporary, of course. Evan will pay you back as soon as he gets paid for his new contract. I blinked in surprise. After our conversation a week ago, Evan still hadn't shown me any documents about my money. And now Mirabelle was asking for more? I don't have that kind of money, Mirabelle, I replied. Evan invested all my savings in his business 3 years ago. What about your pension? She leaned closer. Surely you've put something aside. My pension is barely enough for medicine and small expenses. I shook my head. After paying for insurance, there's very little left. Mirabelle's face changed. The mask of politeness disappeared, giving way to irritation. Are you saying that you live in our house for free, eat our food, enjoy all the benefits, but can't help in a difficult moment? Her words hurt more than a broken arm. Mirabelle, I gave Evan everything I had, the money from selling the house, I tried to explain. If I still had it, I would gladly help, but I don't. Of course, she snorted. Evan lost everything as usual. He never knew how to run a business. Then maybe you shouldn't have asked me to invest in his business. The words came out before I had time to think. Mirabelle stared at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. What did you say? Nothing. I tried to smooth things over. I'm just sorry I can't help. Oh no, she shook her head. You said something else. Are you accusing us of depriving you of money after everything we've done for you? I'm grateful to you for the roof over my head, I replied cautiously. Grateful? Mirabelle laughed, and there was not a trace of joy in her laughter. You should pray to us every day. Do you know how much it costs to keep an extra person in the house, and your medication, and that nurse Evan hired? At that moment, Evan walked into the kitchen. Judging by his rumpled appearance, he hadn't slept all night. What's going on? He asked, looking at us. I heard loud voices. Oh, nothing much, Mirabelle replied sarcastically. I'm just explaining to your mother that we're on the verge of bankruptcy, and she refuses to help. What? Evan looked from his wife to me. Mom, what is she talking about? Mirabelle asked to borrow money, I tried to speak calmly. I explained that I didn't have any, that it was all invested in your business. And lost, Mirabelle added, like everything else you touch. Not now, Mirabelle. Evan rubbed his eyes. I haven't slept in 2 days trying to save what's left. And how's that going? She crossed her arms over her chest. Judging by the look on your face, not very well. I sold the equipment, Evan said quietly. At a bargain price, but it should be enough to pay off the most urgent creditors. What about the business? Mirabelle asked. It's gone, Evan said, sinking into a chair next to me. I'm bankrupt, Mira, officially. A heavy silence fell. I looked at my son, not knowing what to say. His shoulders slumped, his eyes frozen in despair. At that moment, he looked like a beaten dog. What now? Mirabelle finally asked. You were right, Evan sighed. We'll have to sell the house. It's the only way to get rid of the debt and start. What about your mother? Mirabelle nodded in my direction. What are we going to do with her? Evan suggested sending me to a boarding house for the elderly in Baton Rouge, run by a Mrs. Farlow, an acquaintance of Mirabelle's. I wasn't happy with that option. I said that I had agreed to stay with my neighbor, Hannah Layton, and then move in with Eloise when she returned from her business trip. My words caused a real explosion. Evan, usually reserved, suddenly lost his temper. Fine! Evan suddenly slammed his fist on the table and jumped up. Yes, you've become a burden. You've always been a burden. Ever since Dad died, you've clung to me, expecting me to solve all your problems. I recoiled as if he had hit me. Evan! Mirabelle pulled him back, looking almost frightened. No, let him hear. Evan was furious. I lost my business. I'm up to my ears in debt. I might lose my house, and all she cares about is her own comfort. Where was her concern when I needed help? Where was her advice, her support? I've always supported you, I whispered. With words. He waved his hand. Empty, useless words. Everything will be fine, son. You can do it, dear. What about real help? What about the money you poured into that damn house on the Esplanade instead of investing it wisely? Evan, it was our family home. I didn't recognize my son. Your father? My father has been dead for 8 years, Evan shouted. And I'm alive, and I'm drowning, and you're dragging me down with you. Evan, calm down. Mirabelle put her hand on his shoulder. The neighbors will hear. I don't care about the neighbors. He shook her hand off. I can't pretend anymore. I can't be the perfect son, the perfect husband, the perfect businessman. I'm just a normal person, and I have my limits. He turned to me, his eyes burning with rage. Get out! Get out of my house right now! You're a burden I can no longer bear. I stood up, feeling my knees tremble. There was a lump in my throat, but I wasn't going to cry. Not here, not in front of them. I'll leave, I said quietly. But know this, Evan. What you just said cannot be taken back. Ever. I packed my things into the old suitcase I had brought to this house 3 years ago. Photo albums, a few clothes, a box of mementos. That was all that remained of my former life. When I walked out into the hallway with my suitcase, there was no one there. The front door was ajar, letting in the cool autumn air. I took one last look around the house that had never felt like home and walked out without looking back. Hannah Layton greeted me with open arms. She was my age, but looked younger, fit, energetic, with short-cropped silver hair. Alvin, dear, come in quickly, she said, taking my suitcase. I've prepared the guest room. It has a wonderful view of the garden. Thank you, Hannah. I couldn't hold back my tears. I don't know how to thank you. Nonsense, she waved her hand. I'm glad to have company. Since Henry died, the house feels so empty. Hannah settled me into a cozy room on the second floor. The windows looked out onto a neat little garden with roses in bloom. On the bedside table was a photograph of her late husband, a smiling man with kind eyes. Make yourself comfortable, Hannah said. I'll make us some tea and you can tell me everything. Over tea and homemade cookies, I told her about the latest events. My broken arm, Evan's financial problems, his last words. She listened attentively, without interrupting, only occasionally nodding her head. What are you planning to do next? She asked when I finished. I tried to call Eloise, but it's nighttime in Tokyo right now. I sighed. I left her a message. I hope she calls back when she wakes up. What if she doesn't call back? Hannah asked cautiously. She'll call back, I was sure of it. Eloise had always been reliable. But the day passed and there was no call. I checked my phone every half hour, afraid of missing a call. By evening, I was starting to worry. What if something had happened to her? Or even worse, What if she had received the message but decided not to call back? Don't get yourself worked up, Hannah advised at dinner. The time difference, her busy schedule, bad reception. There could be 1,000 reasons why she hasn't responded yet. You're right, I tried to smile. It's just that after today, I feel so abandoned. You're not abandoned. Hannah squeezed my good arm tightly. You have me, your old friend. The next 2 days were spent waiting. I called Eloise several times, but got her voicemail. I left messages, calm at first, then increasingly desperate. It seemed to me that my last hope was fading with every passing hour. Hannah was a true friend. Not only did she give me a place to stay, but she also helped me with everyday tasks. She cooked meals, did laundry, and even helped me wash, which was a real challenge with a cast. In the evenings, we would sit in her cozy living room, listen to old records, and reminisce about our youth. Remember when we went to that jazz club in the French Quarter? Hannah laughed. What was it called? The Blue Note? The Black Cat, I corrected her. And that trumpet player who tried to ask you out. Oh, Miles! Hannah blushed. He was handsome. And you turned him down for Henry, who was just an accountant at the time. The best decision of my life, Hannah smiled, looking at a photo of her husband. 46 years of happiness. I thought about my 48 years with Percy, how we raised our children, how we struggled through difficulties, how we supported each other. What would he say if he saw what our son had become? On the third day, when I had almost given up hope of reaching my daughter, the doorbell rang. Hannah went to answer it, and I stayed in the living room, not expecting anything good. Maybe Evan had come to apologize, or worse, to demand that I go to Baton Rouge after all. Alvin, Hannah called. Someone wants to see you. I went into the hallway and froze. Standing on the doorstep was Eloise, my daughter, in a business suit and carrying a suitcase. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a tight bun, but a few strands had escaped and framed her tired face. Mom, she rushed toward me, hugging me so tightly that I felt pain in my broken arm, but I didn't pay any attention to it. I'm sorry. I flew here as soon as I could. What happened? Why are you here? What's wrong with your arm? The tears I had been holding back for 3 days finally flowed freely. I clung to my daughter with my good arm, unable to say a word. Eloise stroked my back and whispered words of comfort, just as I had once comforted her, a little girl frightened by a thunderstorm. I'll leave you two alone, Hannah said tactfully. Eloise, you must be hungry after your trip. There's soup and fresh bread in the kitchen. Thank you, Mrs. Layton. Eloise nodded gratefully. And thank you for taking my mother in. She's a good guest. Hannah smiled and went upstairs, leaving us alone. We sat in the kitchen, and I told my daughter everything that had happened over the past few weeks, pausing to sob. About my broken arm, Evan's financial problems, the money lost from the sale of the house, my son's cruel words. Eloise listened, her face growing darker and darker. I'll kill him, she said when I finished. I swear I'll kill him. No, dear. I shook my head. Evan just broke under pressure. He was always more fragile than he seemed. That's no excuse, Eloise snapped. Kick his own mother out of the house? Call you a burden? After everything you've done for him? She stood up and began pacing the kitchen, just as she had done as a child when she was upset or angry. I don't understand why you didn't call me as soon as the problem started, she said, turning to me. I would have flown over immediately. You had important negotiations, I shrugged. I didn't want to get in the way. Mom, Eloise knelt down next to me. You have never been and never will be in the way. You're my mother. You're more important than any negotiations, any contracts, any career. Her words, so different from what Evan had said, made me cry again. Okay, enough tears, Eloise said firmly, standing up. I'm here now, and we'll figure everything out. We're going to my place tomorrow. Your place? But you're always traveling, I said, wiping my eyes. I took a month's vacation, she smiled. And I also asked to be transferred to a department with fewer business trips. I've wanted to do this for a long time. I just didn't have a reason. Now, I do. But your career... My career can wait. Eloise kissed me on the forehead. Right now, we need to think about how to punish Evan for what he did. Eloise's house was the complete opposite of where I lived with Evan and Mirabelle. Instead of cold elegance, creative chaos reigned here. Books on the shelves, paintings on the walls, soft pillows on the sofas. Everything created an atmosphere of comfort and warmth. The apartment was located in an old, renovated building in the Garden District, with high ceilings and large windows, overlooking a quiet street lined with oak trees. "Make yourself comfortable," Eloise said, putting my suitcase in the guest room. "The bathroom is across the hall. I'll make us something to eat." I looked around. The room was small but cozy, with a comfortable bed and a desk by the window. There were photographs on the walls. Eloise at her graduation, Percy and me on our 40th anniversary, a family portrait taken when the children were 10 or 12. I was surprised to notice that there were no photographs of Evan. "When did you take them down?" I asked when Eloise returned with a tray holding 2 cups of tea and a plate of sandwiches. "What exactly?" She set the tray on the table. "The photos of Evan, they're not here." Eloise hesitated, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "To be honest, Evan and I haven't been very close for the last few years," she admitted. "After what happened with your house." "My house?" I frowned. "Did you know it was sold?" "Of course, you told me yourself." Eloise looked surprised. "3 years ago, after the hurricane." "Yes, but you sound like you know something else." Eloise sighed deeply. "Mom, when you sold the house and gave the money to Evan, I was against it. Remember, we talked about it on the phone?" I vaguely remembered that conversation. Eliza was really skeptical, saying that I should keep at least some of the money in a separate account. "I remember," I nodded. "But Evan was so sure that his business would be profitable." "Evan has always been confident in his dubious ideas," Eloise smiled bitterly. "Remember his underwater photo studio project? Or the chain of vegan restaurants he wanted to open without having the slightest idea about cooking? He's just a dreamer." I tried to defend my son. "He has a lot of ideas." "Ideas that never work out." Eloise shook her head. "And every time, someone else pays for his mistakes. First Dad, now you." I took a sip of tea, not knowing what to say. Deep down, I knew my daughter was right. Evan had always been impulsive, starting projects without thinking them through and then abandoning them halfway through. "Mom," Eloise leaned toward me, "be honest. Did Evan show you any documents about investing your money? A contract? Account statements? Anything?" I thought about it. When I signed the papers at Evan's office 3 years ago, there was some kind of document, but I didn't even read it properly. I trusted my son unconditionally. "No, he didn't," I admitted. "I just signed what he gave me." "And you don't have a copy?" Eliza frowned. I shook my head. "Evan said he would take care of everything and keep the documents." Eliza stood up and began pacing the room, her hands clasped behind her back, a gesture she had picked up from her father. "That's not good, Mom. Not good at all. Without the documents, it will be more difficult to prove that the money was transferred to him for management, not as a gift." "For management? As a gift?" I looked at my daughter in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Eloise stopped and turned to me. "I'm talking about getting your money back," she said firmly. "Evan took it under the pretext of investing in a business, but from what you've told me, he just embezzled it and spent it." "But the business went bankrupt," I objected. "It's not his fault that the investment didn't pay off." "Mom," Eloise sat down next to me and took my good arm. "I love you very much, but sometimes you're naive. Evan didn't invest that money in the business, at least not all of it. He used it to support his luxurious lifestyle with Mirabelle." "How do you know?" I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "Remember Courtney Hammond, my friend from school? She works at the bank where Evan keeps his company accounts. About a year ago, we ran into each other, and she hinted that my brother's finances weren't in good shape. Of course, she couldn't say anything directly because of banking secrecy, but she advised me to take a closer look at his affairs. I listened, and every word my daughter said was like a blow. Had Evan really deceived me? Stolen my money? I don't want to believe it," I whispered. "I didn't want to either," Eloise squeezed my hand. "But the facts speak for themselves. Evan spent most of your money on himself and Mirabelle, and then when the business really started to fall apart, he used the rest to patch up the holes. And now that things are really bad, he's kicked you out." I closed my eyes, feeling nausea rising in my throat. The image of Evan came to mind, a little boy crying after breaking my Chinese vase. How could this child have turned into a man capable of doing this to his own mother? What do you suggest? I finally asked, opening my eyes. A lawsuit, Eloise replied without hesitation. I'm a criminal lawyer, but I have colleagues who specialize in civil cases. We can sue Evan for fraud and demand compensation for your money. Sue my own son? I was horrified. No, Eloise, I can't. Mom, he stole your money, Eloise insisted. And then he kicked you out of the house when you became inconvenient. He deserves to be punished. He's my son. I shook my head. I can't sue him. But I can, Eloise straightened up. You transferred the money from the sale of the house to Evan's management, but he acted dishonestly and violated his fiduciary duties. That's grounds for a lawsuit. Fido, what? I was confused by the legal terms. Fiduciary duties, Eloise explained patiently. It means that a person who manages someone else's money must act in the interests of the owner, not in their own. Evan did not do that. I leaned back against the pillows, feeling completely exhausted. The events of the last few days, flying halfway across the world, breaking up with my son, it all came crashing down on me, and I could barely think. Let's talk about it tomorrow, I asked. Right now, I just want to rest. Of course, Mom, Eloise kissed me on the forehead. Rest, we're in no hurry. But the next morning, I discovered that my daughter had not wasted any time. When I walked into the kitchen, she was sitting at the table, covered with papers, typing something quickly on her laptop. Good morning, she looked up and smiled. How did you sleep? Fine, thank you. I poured myself some coffee from the pot. What are you working on? Gathering materials for the lawsuit. Eloise turned her laptop screen toward me. Look, I found the statements for the sale of your house. The amount listed here is $120,000. This confirms that you had the money. Eloise worked like a woman possessed. By evening, she had already prepared the first draft of the lawsuit, which she sent to a colleague for review. I was amazed by her energy and determination. She was so much like my father in those moments, the same focused gaze, the same stubborn crease between her eyebrows. I've gathered enough material to file a lawsuit, Eloise said as we ate dinner. But it would be better if we could find more evidence of the misuse of your money. How can we do that? I asked. I don't have access to Evan's accounts. I have friends in banking, Eloise smiled mysteriously, and in the tax office. Don't worry about it. The next day, the doorbell rang. Eloise opened it and returned with an envelope. From Courtney, she waved the envelope. I think this is exactly what we need. She opened the envelope and took out a stack of papers. They were statements from Evan's company accounts for the last 3 years. Eloise began to look through them, making notes. Here, she exclaimed after a while. Look, Mom. A month after you sold the house, $120,000 was deposited into Evan's company account. And a week later, $70,000 was withdrawn. Guess where it went? I shrugged. On the same day, a down payment was made on a new car in Mirabelle's name. Eloise pointed to a line on the statement. $50,000, and another $20,000 was transferred to Evan's personal account with the note vacation. Maybe it was his own money? I was still hoping to find an excuse for my son. Mom, Eloise looked at me sadly. Evan had no other income during that period. Only your money. He just took it and spent it on himself and Mirabelle. I sat there, stunned by these revelations. My son, my little boy, was capable of such deception. It was too painful to accept. I'm filing a lawsuit tomorrow, Eloise said decisively. We have all the necessary evidence. What if Evan goes into hiding? Or hides the remaining money, I asked. I'll file a motion to freeze his assets and accounts, Eloise replied. He won't be able to sell the house or transfer large sums of money until the court decides. The next morning, Eloise went to court to file the paperwork. I stayed home, struggling with conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to protect my son, find an excuse for him, help him get out of this mess. Another part, more rational, understood that Evan deserved punishment for what he had done. Eloise returned at lunchtime, beaming with satisfaction. It's done, she announced as she entered the apartment. The lawsuit has been filed and the arrest warrant has been granted. Evan will receive notification today or tomorrow. What now? I asked. Now we wait, Eloise said, taking off her coat and hanging it in the closet. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week. There, the judge will decide whether there are grounds to proceed with the case. But with our evidence, it's just a formality. We hadn't even finished lunch when Evan's phone rang. I picked up the phone, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. What have you done? My son's voice was filled with rage. You've ruined my life. Evan, I tried to speak calmly. We didn't ruin your life. It was your own actions. What actions? The fact that I lost money in business? That's called risk, Mom. That's how investments work. What about the car for Mirabelle? What about the vacation in the Bahamas? Were those investments too? I asked quietly. There was silence. Then Evan spoke, and his voice sounded completely different, frightened and uncertain. How did you... We have the bank statements, Evan, I sighed. We know where my money went. Mirabelle is hysterical, he said after a pause. She's threatening to leave me. She says she didn't sign up for a life with a bankrupt man who is being sued by his own mother. I didn't want this, I admitted. But you left me no choice when you kicked me out of the house. I was desperate, Mom, he said, his voice taking on a pleading tone. The business was falling apart. The debts were mounting. Mirabelle was constantly pressuring me. I didn't know what to do. You could have told me the truth, I said. We could have found a way out together. What way out? Evan smiled bitterly. Your money is already gone. It's not there. What could I have done? Not kick me out of the house, for starters. I felt anger rising inside me. Not call me a burden after everything I've done for you. I'm sorry about that, really, his voice trembled. Can we meet? Talk in person? Without Eloise and her legal threats? I looked at my daughter, who was standing silently nearby, listening to the conversation. She shook her head. No, Evan, I said firmly. From now on, we'll communicate through the court. Mom, please. He was almost crying. I'll explain everything. I'll find a way to get the money back. Just stop this lawsuit. It's too late, son. I felt tears running down my cheeks. You made your choice. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mixture of pain and relief. Eloise put her arm around my shoulders. You did the right thing, Mom, she said quietly. He deserves what he's getting. I know. I wiped my tears. But that doesn't make it any easier. That same evening, Courtney, Eloise's friend from the bank, called us. Evan is trying to close all the company's accounts, she said, and transfer the remaining money to a new account opened in Mirabelle's name. The New Orleans courthouse resembled an ancient Greek temple. Massive columns, a wide staircase, a light-colored stone facade. At another time, I would have stopped to admire the architecture, but today I had other things on my mind. My heart was pounding like crazy, my palms were sweaty, and my mouth was dry. Everything will be fine, Mom. Eloise squeezed my hand gently. We're better prepared than they are. I nodded, unable to speak. The last 2 weeks had flown by in a blur. After our phone conversation with Evan, he tried to contact me several times, leaving messages asking to meet, but Eloise insisted that I not respond. Any contact outside of court could be used against us, she explained. Evan will surely try to persuade you to withdraw the lawsuit or agree to an unfavorable settlement. We climbed the steps of the courthouse and passed through the metal detectors. Inside, it was cool and echoey, footsteps reverberating in the high corridors. People hurried about their business, lawyers in formal suits, clerks with folders, ordinary citizens with confused expressions. Our courtroom was on the second floor. Eloise led me confidently through the corridors, greeting familiar lawyers. She was respected in this building, as was evident from the way people nodded to her and interrupted their conversations to exchange a few words. Miss Holdsworth, an elderly bailiff smiled at Eloise. It's been a long time since I've seen you here. Hello, Mr. Jenkins. Eloise shook his hand warmly. I'm usually in criminal court, but today is a special case. Meet my mother, Alvin Holdsworth. Pleased to meet you, ma'am. The bailiff nodded to me. You must be proud of your daughter. She's one of the best. I am proud, I smiled, feeling the tension ease a little. We entered the courtroom and took our seats at the plaintiff's table. The public gallery was almost empty, only a few people, probably waiting for their cases. I looked around nervously, searching for Evan, but he wasn't there yet. Evan appeared 10 minutes before the hearing began. He entered accompanied by Mirabel and an elderly man whom I recognized from newspaper photos, Roger Holbrook, a well-known civil lawyer. Evan looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and sunken cheeks. Mirabel, on the other hand, was impeccable as always. A strict suit, perfect hair, a cold stare. Our eyes met across the room. I saw a mixture of emotions in my son's eyes. Anger, fear, perhaps even remorse. But before I could react, Mirabel whispered something to him and he turned away, focusing his attention on his lawyer. "All rise, court is in session," announced the bailiff, and everyone stood up. Judge Marcus Richardson, a tall African-American with graying temples and a penetrating gaze, took his seat. He quickly glanced through the documents in front of him and looked up. "Case number 2336, Holdsworth v. Holdsworth," the judge announced. "Plaintiff, state your name." Eloise stood up, straightening to her full height. "Eliza Holdsworth, Your Honor, representing the plaintiff, my mother, Alvin Holdsworth." "Defendant?" Holbrook rose from his seat, shuffling his feet slightly. "Roger Holbrook, Your Honor, representing the defendant, Evan Holdsworth." The judge noted the unusual nature of the situation, a daughter representing her mother in a lawsuit against her brother, but allowed Eloise to proceed, as she had my written consent, and the defense had no objection. Eloise began to speak, clearly, confidently, without unnecessary emotion. She talked about the sale of my house after the hurricane, about how Evan had convinced me to entrust him with money to invest in his business, promising to preserve and multiply it. She presented evidence that a significant portion of that money had been spent on Evan and Mirabel's personal needs, a new car, a vacation in the Bahamas, jewelry. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Eloise continued, "after the defendant suffered financial ruin, he kicked the plaintiff, his own mother, out of the house, calling her a burden, leaving her without means of support at the age of 74, with a recently broken arm." I felt the color drain from my face. Hearing our family problems discussed in court was agonizingly embarrassing. I didn't dare look at Evan, afraid to see accusation in his eyes. Evan's lawyer rejected all charges. According to him, the money was legally invested in a business that subsequently failed, a normal business risk. He called my departure from home an emotional exaggeration. Allegedly, I left on my own after a family quarrel, refusing Evan's offer of accommodation with friends in Baton Rouge. I was called to testify first. Approaching the witness stand, I took the oath and told my story. About our old house, about the hurricane, about how Evan convinced me to sell the house and invest the money in his business, about how I signed the papers without reading them because I trusted my son unconditionally. "Did you receive a copy of the contract?" the judge asked. "No, Your Honor." I shook my head. Evan said he would keep all the documents himself. I told him about the 3 years I lived in Evan and Mirabel's house, about my broken arm, about the conversation I overheard, about the last argument when Evan kicked me out, calling me a burden. Evan's lawyer tried to portray me as an unreliable witness. He asked if I had memory problems, mentioning instances when I forgot to take my medication or left the stove on. "Objection!" Eloise jumped up from her seat. "The defense is trying to portray my mother as incompetent in order to undermine the credibility of her testimony." "Objection sustained," the judge nodded. "Mr. Holbrook, stick to the facts of the case." Evan was called as the next witness. He answered his lawyer's questions confidently. Yes, he suggested that I sell the damaged house and move in with them. Yes, he suggested investing money in his business, but I agreed to it myself by signing the contract. No, he did not spend that money on personal needs. The car for Mirabel was purchased on installment from his own funds, and the vacation was paid for with credit card bonuses. "What about the claim that you kicked your mother out of the house?" Holbrook asked. "That was a misunderstanding." Evan ran his hand through his hair. "We did have a falling out. I was under a lot of stress because of the business collapse. I said things I regret, but I didn't kick my mom out. She decided to leave on her own." I couldn't believe my ears. Evan was lying under oath. When it was Eloise's turn to ask questions, she approached her brother with a folder of documents in her hands. "Evan," her voice was deceptively soft, You claim that you didn't spend mom's money on personal expenses, right? Right, he nodded, still avoiding looking at me. Then explain this transfer. Eloise handed him the document. $50,000 from your company's account to Prestige Motors on May 22nd, 3 years ago. Exactly 1 week after mom's money was deposited into the company's account. Evan paled as he looked at the document. It, it was a business purchase, a company car. Really? Then why does the sales contract list Mirabelle as the owner? Eloise handed him another document. That was for insurance. Evan began to stammer. It was more profitable that way. What about this transfer? Eloise continued to press him. $20,000 to Caribbean Dreams travel on the same day? Also a business trip? Yes, I was planning to open a branch in the Bahamas. Evan looked increasingly uncertain. Interesting, Eloise feigned surprise. Then why are you sunbathing on the beach and diving in the photos from that trip that Mirabelle posted on social media, instead of attending business meetings? Eloise continued to methodically dismantle her brother's testimony, presenting more and more evidence of the misuse of my money. By the end of the cross-examination, Evan looked completely crushed. Mirabelle was the last witness to testify. She held up better than her husband, answering clearly and to the point. No, she didn't know the details of the financial arrangements between her husband and her mother-in-law. Yes, she remembered that I had agreed to invest in Evan's business. No, she didn't know that the money for her new car came from my funds. Mirabelle, Eloise asked, are you claiming that you didn't know where the money for your $50,000 car came from? Evan said it was a bonus from a successful deal. Mirabelle shrugged. I don't get involved in financial details. After questioning all the witnesses, the judge announced a recess to review the documents presented. Eloise and I went out into the hallway. I felt squeezed like a lemon. You were magnificent, I said to my daughter. I didn't know you were such a ruthless prosecutor. I'm just doing my job, Eloise smiled weakly, and protecting you. Evan looked so lost. I couldn't help thinking about my son. Don't feel sorry for him, Mom, Eloise shook her head. He chose this path himself. When the hearing resumed, Judge Richardson looked more serious than usual. Having heard all sides and examined the evidence presented, he began, the court has reached the following conclusion. The investment agreement provided by the defense does indeed exist and was signed by Mrs. Holdsworth. However, it clearly states that the money is to be used exclusively for business development and not for personal needs. The judge paused, looking at Evan. The documents presented by the plaintiff convincingly proved that a significant portion of Mrs. Holdsworth's funds were used by the defendant for personal expenses unrelated to the business. This constitutes a breach of contract and a breach of trust. The court finds that the defendant acted in bad faith, breaching his fiduciary duties to the plaintiff. The judge turned his gaze to me. Regarding the claim that the plaintiff was evicted from the defendant's home, the court finds Mrs. Holdsworth's testimony more convincing. Considering all the circumstances, the court rules to grant the claim in full. I gasped. I couldn't believe we had won. The defendant is ordered to pay the plaintiff the sum of $120,000, representing the proceeds from the sale of the house, which were transferred to the defendant for management, the judge continued. Considering the defendant's financial situation, the court rules that if immediate payment of the entire amount is not possible, part of the defendant's property, namely the house, may be sold to satisfy the plaintiff's claims. I heard Mirabelle gasp sharply. Losing the house was probably the worst possible outcome for her. The court also orders the defendant to pay all court costs and the plaintiff's attorney's fees, the judge concluded. The hearing is adjourned. The judge's gavel sounded like the final chord in a story I never wanted to see played out. We won the case, but I felt no joy, only a deep, all-consuming sadness at the realization that my relationship with my son was ruined, perhaps forever. As we left the courtroom, I looked back at Evan. He was sitting with his head in his hands, and Mirabelle was yelling something at him, not caring if anyone could hear her. I wanted to go over, hug my son, and tell him that everything would be okay. But I knew that was no longer possible. Too much had been said. Too much had been done. Let's go, Mom. Eloise took my arm. There's nothing more to do here. 3 months had passed since the trial. Life was gradually returning to normal. Eloise and I continued to live together, and I was grateful to my daughter for her support and care. My arm had finally healed, and I could do without the cast, although the doctor warned that it would take several more months to fully recover. Evan and Mirabelle were forced to sell their house to pay me compensation and settle other debts. They moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Evan got a job as a manager in a furniture store, and Mirabelle found work at a travel agency. I heard news about them through mutual acquaintances, but we had no direct contact. Evan tried to call several times, but I wasn't ready to talk. The wound was too fresh. Eloise helped me invest the money I received in reliable bonds and deposits to ensure a stable income. I insisted that part of the money go toward her mortgage, despite her protests. She had done so much for me. It was the least I could do to repay her. That evening, we sat on the balcony of her apartment watching the sunset over New Orleans. The city spread out before us, sparkling with lights, alive and ever-changing, like life itself. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Eloise asked, noticing my pensive gaze. "About life," I smiled. "About how everything changes, how we change." "Do you regret anything?" I thought about it. Did I regret entrusting Evan with the money? Did I regret taking the case to court? Did I regret that our family had split up? "No," I finally said. "Regret means getting stuck in the past, and I want to live in the present." Eloise squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, Mom. You're stronger than you think." "I just realized one important thing," I said, looking at the horizon where the sun was slowly sinking behind the rooftops. "Sometimes, in order to move forward, you have to let go of what's holding you back, even if it's your own child." "And have you let go?" Eloise asked cautiously. "I'm trying," I sighed. "It's not easy, but I'm not going to live in the past anymore, clinging to relationships that only bring pain." "Evan called today," Eloise said unexpectedly. My heart skipped a beat. "What did he want?" "To talk to you. He said he regrets what he did and wants to apologize in person." "And what did you say?" "That it's your decision." Eloise shrugged. "I have no right to decide for you, Mom." I watched the sunset, thinking, was I ready to meet Evan? Would I ever be able to forgive him? I didn't know. But maybe someday, when the pain subsided, I would find the strength to at least listen to him. "Not now," I finally said. "Maybe later, when I'm ready." Eloise nodded without insisting. We sat in silence, watching the last rays of the sun paint the sky scarlet and gold. I thought about how strange life is. I lost my home, my money, my relationship with my son. But at the same time, I gained a new understanding of myself, my strength, my boundaries. And most importantly, I had gained a new life with my daughter, who had never betrayed or rejected me. Yes, I had lost a lot, but I had gained perhaps even more. And ahead of me lay the future, unknown, but full of possibilities. My own new chapter, which I wrote myself, without looking back at the past, without fear of the future. Just day after day, together with my daughter, who has always been and remains my support. I took a deep breath of the evening air, smelling of magnolias and the river, and felt a strange calmness. Life goes on, and whatever it may be in the future, I am ready to accept its challenges with an open heart and a clear mind.